Okay, so I will go on mute. I invite everyone else to do that as well, as we invite Judy to share her wisdom about these readings that we've had the opportunity to explore.
Well, every year we've had these readings at the end of our time together, but this year, folks, these readings were designed for the end of this time together, I think, excuse me, in ways that are just startling. I did a thing I haven't done in a long time. I took an entire day and did nothing else but read these very slowly. And I know you all don't have the luxury to do that, but there's something about the ideas in these that I think are so, first of all, grounding and helpful, but also so central to our leadership, particularly in this field. So I want to start with Parker's piece called Leading from Within, because the article almost always gets lost in the book time. So let me talk a little bit about that. This piece was sent to me by a friend in 1993, this piece right here. And I want to tell you that because of the impact I think we can have in each other's lives when we find something and think, so-and-so should have this. It would really make a difference to her. I'm going to send this to Garrett because there's just something in it that says to me that it could make a difference for him. So Denny Roberts, whom I hadn't heard from in probably 10 years, sent me this article, and it transformed the forward path in my life in many ways. And so I want to underscore what I think are four sort of critical ideas in it. One is the importance of taking absolutely seriously time for the inner reflective work, which gets lost in the exterior demands on us that are coming at us all the time. For me, that work is the half an hour in the journal every morning, no matter what. For other people, it's other things, but it feels like it's at the cost of the things that really matter, when what this article is saying to us is, it is the thing that really matters because it has such influence on what it is that we are able to do in the world, particularly in difficult times in the world. The second thing I'd want to underscore is what he has to say about natural human fears. And you guys all have the Leader's Guide. So just make a mental note that on page 95 of the Leader's Guide is a thing about fears, the 5 fears that Parker talks about, alternative ways of thinking. So he talks, for instance, about not feeling sure and competent yourself. And an alternative way of thinking is you weren't born knowing everything you now know. We have to learn our way through things. But if we can't admit that we're having a day when we feel uncertain about ourselves, then when other people come into our office to chat with us, they leave feeling incompetent. That is, our own unexamined sense of not being sure and not feeling competent ends up visiting itself on them, and they end up leaving with that feeling. There are good psychological terms for that, like projection and so forth, none of which I learned because I was an English major. But the idea of that chart on page 95, which is for each of those fears, I'm in it alone. There is a balancing idea, which is there's generosity of help all around me. Those balancing ideas come to us in a variety of ways. You can get them in neuroscience. You can get them from faith communities. They are belief statements or science statements, however you want to do it. But they remind us how critical it is to realize how human it is to be fearful and scared, and how critical it is as leaders to know what's going on within ourselves so that we can balance ourselves in such a way that the people around us are not essentially damaged and weakened by our inability to know ourselves. The third thing I already said, which is send each other things. It could change lives and you have no way of knowing. All right. So follow your instincts when you see something interesting and send it on to somebody. You may never know if it's just the right thing that day that helps them steady up, or like this article, it sent me into a community of practice called the Courage and Renewal community that I've now been active in for 25 years. Just this one article did that, and it's made a huge difference to me. So send people stuff. Okay, that's the bottom line on that one. And then the last thing is, he quotes Václav Havel at the beginning at great length about consciousness. And what that raised for me is Havel's observations about his own leadership when he was in the middle of what would turn out to be the Velvet Revolution, but it was not clear would it be velvet or bloody. In his country, he'd been imprisoned, he came out, he was president of the country. And he was so exhausted, weary, so many of us have said that in other ways, that he left the center of Prague, where all the uncertainty was, the political uncertainty, and went out in the country to stay with a friend for a couple of days. And the people in the center city wanted him to come back, kept saying they had to have him back. So he went back, and he said what he learned from that was the critical lesson. There was nothing that only he could do. I was thinking what various of us have said. I was thinking what Ken said actually about his team. There was nothing that only he could do, but what they needed was a non-anxious presence in their midst, because it kept them from being confused. So we might say, well, how in the world could I be a non-anxious presence? That loops back to the kind of reflective work that we have to do in order to be steadied enough to be genuinely a non-anxious presence. It's that prior inner work that allows us, despite the chaos circling around us, to keep steady, to keep genuinely, authentically steady enough, despite our own uncertainty and not knowing the answers, to be able to allow those around us to act without being afraid and without being confused. So in some ways, that article, Parker's piece, Leading from Within, which comes from a fabulous book, now I'm going to do a book commercial, called Let Your Life Speak, which does not mean, as you would think, be like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. It means listen up to your life. Let your life speak to you about what's going on with your life and with yourself and with your path. All right. And a parallel that he wrote probably 25 years later called On the Brink of Everything, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old, which should be in every one of our communities. So that's Parker.
What was that first book you said?
It's called Let Your Life Speak. Let Your Life Speak. Okay.
I have to say, when I was just up in Michigan a few weeks ago with my dad, my family's from Czechoslovakia, my dad's side. My last name is really Masyk. They dropped the YK, which is a famous university in Czechoslovakia still. So Masaryk is really my name. So that history of the first president, I mean, whether there's lineage, nobody's ever done it, but I mean, I want to get there someday. We went to the Netherlands, where my wife is from, first generation, but the history of our family, and I didn't even realize till I just went back how many Catholics we had. They're all in the Catholic cemetery at home, and I'm like, why did I not know this history? But
right. Go to Prague.
I always knew, because people that are Czech that see my name, they'll ask, was your name modified when you came to the States, or your family? So very, very interested in the paper and any other writings from people from that area. So
terrific. All right. So now I'm going to shift to Sabbath, the book about how critical rest is if we are to be able to do our best in the world. I won't just say our best work, because it's about, I think Sabbath is about much more than our ability to show up Monday morning refreshed and able to do what we need to do. It's about our ability to be present to all the critical relationships in our lives. And one of the things that struck me as I was reading that, and also as we were doing check-in this morning, is that this moment together with no place to go, particularly in my case, no place to go, I can't go anyplace, is a treasure. These are Sabbath moments, and how important it is for us to spot them when they show up, to treasure them for even the brief moments they give us to take a breath, to realize that we are really in this together. I mean, when we look around the screen, we really are in this together, and that we're linked across the distance in ways that are comforting and surviving. We're not sitting around the table together like we wanted to, and yet we are sitting around a set of connections that give us breathing space, that allow us to take time out. So this theme of the power of rest, understood either in spiritual terms and or religious practice terms, or just in terms of getting out and walking in nature, or taking a chance to soak in other kind of beauty, or finally sitting down and playing the piano again, whatever it is that allows us that kind of touching back in with our core self and our core values. When I was reading that book, what startled me was how much it was the story of people who hit the walls because they couldn't slow down enough, because they couldn't take time out, because, and this is something I think we really struggle with, because the work we're doing is so important and we're trying to save lives. And there's nothing more important than that. We're trying to hold our teams together, and we're trying to help our people understand how much we care about them. And if you read that book carefully, those are the stories of the people who hit the wall and weren't able to function at all. Within the last 10 days, I got a note from a doctor in England, and he was writing to say that he had, as they say over there, hit the buffers. I had not heard that phrase before. He was a physician in general practice, and he had totally burned him. Actually, a leadership position in medicine. Listen to this, guys, a leadership position. And he just burned out completely, couldn't function. And so he had long thought that he'd had a dream of wanting to build wooden boats. How crazy is this, guys? And he couldn't figure out whether he should take that seriously or not. And one day he was thinking about signing up for the British, wherever it is, wooden boat building school. And somebody sent him a book of poetry, and it fell open to the poem that's in your leader's guide that starts, "I have a brother who builds wooden boats." And the doctor looked at that poem and looked at his circumstance, closed the book back up, signed up for the boat building school, and took the boat building school for a year. And at the end of the time, he thought he had so burned out he couldn't possibly return to his work. He's back in practice, but only 2 days a week. And the rest of the time, he's working on wooden boats. All right. That is not a story in Sabbath. That's a story in my life. All right. Of someone who happened on something. It's the story of passing something along to somebody else that made it possible for him to move in a healthier direction for himself, that actually ended up healing himself. So the other thing I mentioned just in passing is that Wayne and Mark Nepo, Mark who wrote the poem, The Appointment, that we started, are close friends. I was thinking about what Deb said of, the 2 that became 3 that became 5 that get together on regular occasions. The way in which those kinds of bonds formed, reformed, found, tended, cared for over time make it possible for us to keep on keeping on with really important things in our lives. And so I think the Sabbath book, subtly, it doesn't say this directly. What it says directly is have these practices, and there are a variety of very useful practices in that book. But what it says underneath that you almost can't feel is form these bonds that will make it possible for you to weather difficulties that lie ahead. Remember the Stepping Stones poem, the idea that we look back at our stepping stones and we say, boy, some of those were really rough. And the end of that poem of mine says something roughly like, and the ones ahead, those ahead as well. They won't all be like COVID, but vaccine and everything, life will not be smooth sailing all days ahead. And so realizing, I'm going to say the responsibility that each of us in this circle has to take the step to connect with others, to not wait for it to accidentally happen, to not wait for Brianna to get us organized, to understand the way in which our own choices to connect can transform lives and can transform us as leaders. So the rituals, we've had Sabbath rituals part of our entire experience. The chime, the check-in, 5 minutes before we go to check in to get our notes in our journal, the journals. All of these are, in a sense, small Sabbaths. It's not that we had that in mind when we designed these. It's just that as I look at them now, that's actually what we've been experiencing. Which then would say to us as we move forward in the year ahead, how are we ourselves going to make sure that whichever of those have the most meaning, we continue to carry them forward in our lives? And I was thinking of Deb's group in that huge circle. How are we going to offer those as we move forward? A poem, not all poems, but a poem creates a Sabbath space. Read slowly, short poem, one that really touches you. That creates a spaciousness, a chance to take a breath. So I think what Wayne Muller is offering us is not only all these very thoughtful practices, he's suggesting to us the responsibility and the gift we have that we offer to each other in taking the time to bring those kinds of practices into the spaces that we inhabit together, and to form the kind of bonds that become, in a sense, a Sabbath circle for ourselves into which we can step from time to time. I was thinking of Roberto saying, we're missing the chances to gather around the table. We are, in a literal sense, this year, but we're not in the future. There's nothing to stop us from becoming a kind of Sabbath circle for each other in a variety of different ways among ourselves and with the extraordinary alumni group that we're all stepping into in the days ahead. So I think that's all I would have to say. This is usually when I turn to Wendy and Brianna and say, have I done okay? Are we done with this? And send you off on a walk and talk. I'm trying to think. Wendy, do you want to do the tasking on that, or do you want me to?
I'm fine too. If you'd
You're
like.
on. You're on.
Thank you, Judy.